How long will it take the Federal Reserve to bring inflation down? I'm Dr. Bill Connerly. I connect the dots between the economy and business, and the business leaders I talk to are asking, what about inflation? How long will it persist? There are certainly some transitory elements, but there's also a lot of inflation coming from strong monetary policy. I'm recording this the day after Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed, testified to a Senate committee that the Fed would raise interest rates when it needed to. He, of course, was a little unclear about when that was. And I'm also recording this the day that the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that inflation over the last 12 months ran 7.1%. So there's definitely an inflation issue, and the time lag of monetary policy is important. For years, I've used as a rough rule of thumb a 2 year time lag between monetary policy and inflation. It's a shorter time lag between monetary policy and spending, production, and employment, but 2 years has been my rough estimate. And that is a simplification. It's actually what we economists call a distributed lag. So the Fed tightens or eases. The effect on inflation begins early and then rises and then declines. And that sort of peak effect, the average impact, I've been using as a rule of thumb 2 years. There's a recent meta-analysis. A couple of economists looked at all of the studies, recent studies of time lags in monetary policy, different countries, different eras, and found that they, on average, found 29-month time lag. So that's 2.5 years. Milton Friedman famously said the time lags are long and variable, and the meta analysis confirms that viewpoint. So we cannot take as fixed the time lag, but it's on that order of magnitude, 2.5 years. So, what does that mean for a forecast of inflation here in 2022 or in 2023? Let's look at the monetary stimulus that the Federal Reserve has put into the economy. And I'm showing a chart that starts in 2000. Wow. We had a little bump up. We called it quantitative easing in 2008 and 9 in that recession. A couple of more rounds of quantitative easing when the economic recovery looked a little sluggish to the Federal Reserve. And then Katie barred the door. Look at all of that stimulus recently. I'd like to focus in on the last 3 years. You can see that in terms of Federal Reserve activity, things were fairly stable in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and a lot of stimulus went in April of 2020. Since then, there's been growth, but it seems mild, but the actual numbers are a 19% increase in Federal Reserve credit is the expression that is used in the technical jargon, a 19% increase over the course of 2021. So that leads me to say that this year's inflation, 2022's inflation, is kind of baked in the cake based on the stimulus put into the economy in 2020 and in 2021, interacting with those long time lags. There will be some adjustment based on supply chains. I think that things will get better in the U.S., labor availability. Things will get worse in China as they're locking down in response to the Omicron variant. But those supply chain issues are small potatoes compared to the massive government stimulus from the Federal Reserve. So, what is going to happen when the Fed tightens? First, the Fed will tap on the brakes. That's a metaphor commonly used. Tap on the brakes, and not much will happen. The same thing was true in 1979. Paul Volcker wanted to bring inflation down, tapped on the brakes. Not much happened because of those long time lags. Things were happening, the process was going, but we did not see the end result for quite a while. And I believe that the same thing will happen when the Fed starts tightening later in 2022. We will not see much effect. The Fed will then push down harder on the brakes, and the economy will be at risk of a recession. One of the things we know about inflation is that countries with low inflation rates tend to be fairly stable. So let's look at what the US economy was in the 10 years before the pandemic. This is GDP changes adjusted for inflation. A little bit of variation, but it was fairly stable, no recessions. What would this have looked like if inflation had not averaged 2% in this era, but inflation were really high? We actually ran that experiment back in the 1970s through 1982. Inflation averaged 9%, and the economy went up, it went down, it went up, it went down, it went up, it went down. I believe we are in for this kind of period. And business leaders should think about this because you have seen some big recessions, but you have not seen them back to back. So, unless you're really old and you remember the 1970s. So we had a recession, officially declared a recession last year, but that was the first recession since 2009. And the 2008-2009 recession was after a long period of growth since the 2001 recession, and that was a decade after the prior recession in 1990 and 91, which came 8 years after 82. So what you as a business leader have seen through most of your career is recessions with long periods of growth. I think we're going to go to booms, and I think we're going to go to busts fairly quickly together. I would recommend that you do some contingency planning. You cannot hunker down right away because you need to use the good times to prepare for the bad times. But I think that everybody needs to be more flexible, and you might even want to think about my book, The Flexible Stance, on how to be ready for the next downturn and the next boom when it comes. I'm Dr. Bill Connerly. I connect the dots between the economy and business. I put out a monthly newsletter, which I'd love for you to subscribe to. It's free. You can subscribe by texting the word econ to 42828. Just enter those 5 digits as if it's a phone number and text the word econ to 42828. I'm Dr. Bill Connerly. Thanks for watching.